Hello, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office TV. Today, we are covering the topic that is among the most requested that I get from many of you, and it's an important one. Investment professional discusses his experience working in a single family office. Now, I did something solo on this about 2 weeks ago, but nothing beats actually having someone that many of you could relate to that had that opportunity for many, many years and is a tremendous critical thinker or creative thinker and has a lot of insights to share. So before we get to that, just very quickly, a little bit of housekeeping. It is now post Labor Day. The summer, well, is unofficially over. I hope you all had a great summer. For me, it was work, work, work. In my new situation, my Selling Family Office Association and transitioning, I am, for the first time since I left, whatever, 5, 6 months ago and sold Family Office Association. I am speaking at a conference in New York City next week. For those of you that are around, hit me up. I might be able to get you in. It's going to be sovereign risk and disaster preparedness for billionaires. As you all know, that's one of my master classes and among my favorite subjects to talk about. Although a lot of that I keep in more private settings in my masterclass and to my consulting clients. That same week, meaning next week, I am also off to LA. Same conference, obviously, I think different people other than me, and speaking at the Sofitel in Beverly Hills next Thursday. So if you're around on the West Coast and again, potentially want to attend, it's not my conference. I'm just keynoting there in the morning both times. Hit me up and I might be able to help. So I may be doing no lives next week. There's a chance I do one remotely. We'll see how that plays out. But I am incredibly busy. And many of you know from Family Office TV, please do follow me on all socials. I have 2 YouTubes, including a rather significant at Family Office, where I've had it for many, many years. And it's among the larger platforms and tends to be more investing centric. And I will start to getting, now that we're post Labor Day, busier on there as well. But certainly LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, and Rumble. You can find me, follow me. I put some different content on each, and I have a lot to say and a lot to share. But back to the topic at hand today. Investment professional discusses his experience working in a single family office. Our special guest is Chris Anstey. Chris, how are you?
I'm very good. Nice to see you after a good summer.
Yes, it was. Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to get right to it because it's the question that's of most interest to many people because of supply and demand. There's a lot of people that want to work in a family office, but there's relatively few positions and they're so private and so hard to source. So that question is, how did you get to work within a family office?
Well, I was very fortunate a number of years ago to have dinner with a colleague of mine who is close with a number of pretty wealthy people here. And he mentioned to me that he knew somebody who was starting up a new family office and that I would be a perfect fit for them. And getting vouched for, by my colleague is what got me in the door. But I still had to be a consultant for a number of months before, the principal of the firm got to know me and understood who I was. And eventually it morphed into a full-time role. But you are 100% right. These positions are a diamond in the rough for sure.
Yeah, we're going to circle back to that because it's a principal first time setting up their SFO. And for you being a very senior and very important position, your first time as well. So kind of the lack of peer connectivity and the lack of some knowledge, but in some ways, putting together your background and what you know, there's a chance to do the research yourself and both of you working together. And that must have been really exciting. But let's go back a little bit more in time before that. Tell us a little bit about your background.
My background is 30 plus years in financial services, which I've recently made the change from 20 plus years in financial services. I started off at a bank many, many years ago, building financial product. Then I operated my own broker dealer for a very long time. And then that wound down due to some, pricing issues, shall we say, as we all know that trading businesses went to zero. and regulatory costs went up. So the broker-dealer business became a little bit thin. And then I was looking for something to do after spending the vast majority of my career on the sell side, and having this opportunity to move over to what I would call the quasi buy side was really a great opportunity. And my skill set really played nicely into it.
You said something very intriguing there, and I hope the audience is listening up. So I know you're an intellectual. I know you're very smart. You're a critical thinker. You read a lot, and all that is really cool. But your experiences were more on the sell side. So I know those that are interested in working in the investment arena are usually going to be more on the sell side. And their perspective is, well, why is a family going to want to hire me? They have nothing to offer and sell, in theory, to other families. It really is more internal just for that one family. But there are nuances to understanding both perspectives, buy and sell. And maybe you could explain a little bit of that nuance and why it might have been to your advantage.
Yeah, when you're in a broker-dealer business, you're facilitating order flow or you're offering financial products to your clients. So you're basically engaged in the sell side of the business, right? Where you're facilitating order flow, offering deals for people to invest in, be them private or whatever. When you're working for a family office, depending on sort of their mandate, what they were looking to do as a family office, and we can get into that, you are typically putting money to work for that family, at least in the capacity that I was in. So when you put yourself out there with capital to invest, and any of the listeners out there who maybe work for registered investment advisors or their portfolio managers or chief investment officers of other entities, they are on the buy side, so they understand what that means.
And tell us a little bit about your educational background and perhaps how it came into play post-college in the investment arena. And I'm going to have some follow-up questions on that because I think it relates to critical thinking.
Well, I went to a small college in upstate New York, and I also went to a classic all-boys, college preparatory high school, which was very diligent. So when I got to college, I was a history major because somebody had once told me to major in what you like and what you do well in, because the real world will teach you what you need to know. I did go and obviously if you're chasing some kind of a vocational degree, that's different, but I'm a liberal arts guy where you learn how to learn, and it ushers you into a lifetime of being curious and being out there, looking for things. And then the world went and gave us the internet. So for those of us that are all curious or whatever, we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble, specifically somebody with a bent for history. So I studied history, and then I also created a side study in Soviet studies, because at the time that was pretty much a lot of what was going on in the world. And my thesis back then was women in the Soviet economy. Very
intriguing. If the conversation was a little bit of a different title, as my audience knows, I'm rather active and not lacking an opinion on geopolitics, global issues. And I do bring that into billionaires and family offices, but today is probably not necessarily the right time for that. Going back a little bit to college, and I remember asking this question to billionaire Michael Saylor, go back to my @family office on YouTube 2 springs ago. That was a great interview, if I may say so myself. And a lot of people that I've met, many of the billionaires, like, what was the main value that you got out of college? Let's ignore the fact of you're independent from parents, you're building a network. That's great. Probably a lot of the raw educational stuff was not necessarily as applicable in what you decided to do from the investment arena. But did you learn, quote unquote, how to learn and how to think for yourself?
Oh, without a doubt. And what I would say is, when I compare sort of the structure of my high school career versus college, when you're in a great school, you get a great education whether you want one or not, and that comes with the structure and the diligence and all of that. But when you go off to college, a lot of times there is a great education available, but you as an individual have to go and take it. They're not handing it out. When you're in a structured environment where they're telling you what to do, when you're taking your tests, such as high school is, right, you're going to get through it. because that's the program and the plan. College is outside of, like you said, all of the nuances of the independence and all that. It's up to you. And I think that in my experience, I finished up some history classes. I started taking the Russian language out of curiosity. And then that just sort of opened up a window to me to take a lot of classes, economics classes, history classes, etc., even art classes in everything around the Russian and the Soviet era. So for me, it's a very unique and eclectic sort of, educational path to have taken. But I feel like I really took what that school was offering, and to my benefit. And in a lot of people today, I think, especially any of your younger listeners, you don't want to get all too caught up on having the right degree and having this and having that. What you bring to the table, specifically as we get more into single family offices, your personality matters. These are very wealthy people. They have a lot of relationships across the world. And at the end of the day, you have to be an interesting person, right? In order to sit in some of these rooms.
For sure, especially if the principal is active, and we'll get to that in the family office. What was different, because this was the first time for you, and you did it for a good number of years, working inside the single family office as opposed to other initiatives that you did? I will add, and I think it's a good sign, that you also know what it's like to be an entrepreneur, having created and worked in your own investment firm and broker dealer. You know what it's like to, hey, there's no business coming in. You really have an expensive hobby. You don't really have a business that could earn an income. So I think that gave you a sense of experiences that would likely make you better. And I'd like to hope I know, after 20 years in the single family office community, being better prepared for the role and the opportunity.
I think the biggest difference with a single family office versus other quote unquote jobs is everybody else is in that role to make money for their firm. Whether you're a portfolio manager for a large fund, you're generating fees and performance, or if you're, in any other kind of investment firm, that's what your day-to-day job is. Inside a family office, it really goes into what is the mandate of that office. What are they looking to do? In the case of us, what we were looking to do was put some personal capital of our principal to work in non-correlated investments. What does that mean? It means that the family was non-diversified in their core business, which was a multi-generational business, and they were very.
That's normal.
And yeah, that's what this whole conversation is going to go into. So I think one of the biggest things is that you're going in there not really to build a business. You're not going in there that's going to build a business and go get customers and clients and earn fees and revenue and all that kind of stuff. You're putting money to work for a very specific reason that the principal has laid out in their mandate.
So their interest was they're heavily active in the core family business, which is how they made rich. So they're going to understand the nuances of that. And I'm assuming we're still active as investors and allocators in that business, but they're developing the family office to have effectively 24/7 dedicated just to them. You were obviously a key and integral part, kind of being a founder of the single family office as a non-family executive, definitely a key person. And the core mandate on your side was more in the investing perspective, and that's some of your background, but I want to emphasize that non-correlated. Now, certain years like 2008 and other years, I question whether really anything could be quote unquote truly non-correlated. That being said, what you hope is that if the core business of the family or traditional investments are going down, the non-correlated are quote unquote holding their own. That does not mean over time the return of the non-correlated investments are necessarily going to be better over long periods of time. They may have less volatility, or they may zig when the others are zagging. What was the thesis behind the principle to do that, and how did you fit into that?
He basically wanted some liquidity and diversification across the income streams that he was generating from the family business. And as we know, and his big understanding of the portfolio that we eventually built was he understood that you can make, and he had some friends of his that had done this for a living, so he had a basic understanding that if you're going to make 10 investments, and I had gone over this with him, 2.5 to maybe 3 of them will end up paying for the 10. Right? There is nobody bats 1,000 in terms of private equity, or investing in the private space. Some will be home runs, some will be flat, and some will be goose eggs. And he understood that was the risk. But also, I think what he also was interested in doing was learning about things outside of the family business. And one of the things that you do when you hang a shingle out saying that you're going to be putting the money to work, and in our particular case, and we can get into this as well, is we were somewhat opportunistic. Some other family offices may have different mandates where they're specifically investing in specific.
And they do, yes.
Yeah, we were open. So our conference room was abuzz with great conversations from a consumer packaged good company to a food service company to a technology company, and on and on and on. And at the end of every day, you were just very entertained and curious, because given the family and the family name and resources, we are able to fill the conference room up on a regular basis. And we saw a lot of things.
And we're definitely going to get to that. So will you say that your role helping to be, again, a non-family member, quote unquote, founder of the family office started as getting to know the principal, kind of consulting, and then transitioned, because they were going to be investing centric and non-correlated assets, what I would define as a CIO, and maybe a little bit of some COO duties that cross over a little bit?
100%.
It always does.
It always does. And when you're working with a small team, because we being a de novo shop, we were all wearing multiple hats for sure. What I want to get into a little bit too is that you have some family, this one was particularly unique in its, structure, and also the participation level by the principal. He viewed this as his next act, candidly, and he was actively engaged and very, very enthusiastic about all of the different projects that we would show him and stuff. But there's other family offices that you can get yourself into where there may be a mandate by the family that they're only going to do tech deals, right? Or they're only going to do, maybe the principals want to use that vehicle to cure cancer, or maybe it's, ESG projects. In those cases, you're going out there for a more specific shopping list in terms of where you wanted to put your money to work, right? And then obviously your phone calls coming inbound and outbound would be different than what we saw.
Just for my own edification, was there anyone, whether a classic CEO or president, or more of a consigliere to the principal, that did the other services relative to looking at the tax picture, the estate picture, managing residences, maybe family governance and dynamics inside the family, a chief learning officer? A family office is often more than simply investing. Did they progress to that over time, or was it really more of a true investment office for the family?
In our particular case, it remained a true investing vehicle. We did speak over time about either one, helping other family offices do it, right? Because we had built a pretty nice infrastructure and deal flow for ourselves. But the extended family itself had more than enough advisors and support in regards to the tax and the estate planning and all that. We didn't cover that. Well, and it is customary in some family offices that they do get into all of those different roles.
Extremely customary. And I could argue that tends to bond the family with the family office more. There's nuances beyond investing, but again, perhaps a subject for a little bit of a different time. But you said something that caught my ear. The principal, unlike some other principals, they sounded pretty excited and active. Now, COVID might have changed some things, but pre-COVID, would you say the principal would actively, on a regular basis, even go into the office?
Oh yeah, we were a full-time shop, and we were in there every day. And like I said, the conference room was a buzz. I mean, we took a lot of meetings. We met a lot of people at various levels of, it was really, he was really active, and he drove it, and he was excited about it for sure. During COVID, and I will tell you that it's one of the bigger conversations that's being had in the country, obviously, is the post-COVID world. COVID was definitely a curveball, specifically for those of us from an older generation that were born and raised to show up. The not going into the office, we were still active on Zoom every day, and everybody was participating and all that. But once COVID wound down, yeah, we were going back. We were heading back into the office, at least for a few days a week, for sure.
And putting a little bit of a spotlight for a second. So this is a principle that non-correlated stuff was relatively new to them. As you got to engage more with the principal, especially even early in the process of the family office, what impressed you about their capability to learn quickly, to adapt, to make quick decisions? What did you learn about the principal himself?
Well, as I got to know him and the family in general, I mean, it really just tells you, like, there are wonderful people in the world, right? And there are special families. There truly are. And in terms of the way this family was tight and diligent and cared and philanthropic and everything, you couldn't have asked for a better crew to work with. And you were pleased to help him do what he wanted to do. And as time went on, and him and I became closer, and the firm became closer, and our investments started to age within the portfolio and everything, it was really, watching sort of, and for lack of a better term, it's great for all of us, regardless of whatever age you're at, to just have this period of wonder and kind of childlike naivety, because it just makes you feel alive. So if you're coming out of a conference room where we just had an hour-long conversation on the stuff that your family's been talking about forever, I don't know if that really gets you care as much as you have to care. But when you're getting out of a conference room with somebody that is just that's got a product that's starting to really sell off the shelves, or they're building a tech thing that's going to change the way people live their lives, I think it was just an evergreen market, for lack of a better term, and everybody was seeing that level of excitement was great.
Would you say the principal's interest in being in an investment-centered office, more so on non-correlated, at least to traditional or their core businesses, were you more of an allocator to funds, or was it more investing in private companies, or a combination?
We were 100% at the beginning. We were 100% direct. Cap table investors in our companies, and we would even look to play some kind of strategic roles, because courtesy of myself and obviously everybody else in the office or whatever, we have pretty nice Rolodexes and relationships, so we were able to help client these early firms, because when you're looking at, depending on what stage you're going at, we sort of focused on Series A, which is post-revenue companies for people. But a lot of startups, if you're doing VC and you're doing startups and you're allocating capital, there's a whole litany of deliverables that those CEOs have to do, right? They're going to have to get payroll. They're going to have to get a website. They're going to have to get this. And what we thought about at one time was maybe we could take on some of those responsibilities and help a lot of these companies do that. Because if you're allocating $1 million, let's say you have 10 of these startups and you allocate $1 million to each one of them, they're all going to use $250 on the same stuff. So you want to use that capital to generate growth as opposed to building out infrastructure, right? So we thought about it for a period, and we did it for a couple of them, helping them get out and get started and stuff.
Yeah, building systems and operations and getting experience, because some of it is a duplicate, including in bookkeeping and accounting, et cetera, could help in the efficiencies to free up what they should be focused on, which is more big picture, critical thinking, and effectively really execution. Because at the end of the day, you're going to want them to be successful and drive revenue. Talk a little bit, especially since it was more focused on investing, I'm assuming a minority investment, directly into a relatively smaller, quote unquote, earlier stage company. How did you get deal flow?
Well, I'll take a step back on. We pivoted. We did do the pivot, and I'm using that word, specifically from from pre-revenue to post-revenue companies, partly because from an investment perspective, that timeline has some challenges with it, right? And then you end up getting the phone call a lot of times from the pre-revenue company where they are either going to have to do another raise, some form of a convertible, or you may get that inevitable phone call where they are pivoting the business plan, right? Because things just weren't going the right way. Some pivots could be more dramatic than others, and then you got to watch out for that. So we felt, and we made the decision to switch to post-revenue companies, because I think if you've got $5, $6, $7, $8 million in rev, the distance for that company to get to 20, 25 million in rev is much shorter than it was for them to get to the 5 or 6.
100%.
So, yeah.
But nonetheless, in terms of sourcing, how do you do that?
So the sourcing was, like I mentioned earlier, I think that if you make it known to people that you have money to put to work, right, then people will find you. So once we made the announcement within our particular Rolodex is that this is what we were doing as a collective basis, deal flow started coming our way. The larger the family and the more exposure that you have, right, everybody's going, you'll be surprised at how many people find out about you. And the more specific, in our case, we were opportunistic. So we took what we were looking for. But if you have a very specific thesis as to what you're looking to do with the partner's capital, right, then you may have your own shopping list, right? So, and when you have your own shopping list, then you're making proactive phone calls to companies that you and your team of analysts have found and are looking for.
And in terms of how do you utilize business brokers, investment bankers, people that the principal, yourself, and perhaps others on your team have a Rolodex of, because you're going to get a lot of things that are kind of going to be what you're not going to invest in. How do you help to narrow that down and make quick decisions what to take to the next step?
I'm sorry, say that again. Just say that again. The comment.
Meaning you're probably getting hundreds and hundreds of deals, if not more, coming in over the course of the year from the principal, yourself, and others on the team. How did you weed through them to focus on, okay, this 5% that's coming in, we're going to take to the next level? Like, so how did you just buzz through that?
Yeah. So in regards to that, so, obviously we did, and I'm not disparaging anybody's, choice. And I did spend time on the sell side. So a lot of times, a lot of guys, you would get some random unknown, solicitations, with deal flow. Right. But as a guy who's been doing it for 30 plus years, you end up over time with a gut feeling as to the quality of deals that you're looking for. And so sometimes you would get these things. And I would say that there's a couple of different ways to invest. There's a thematic way to invest, which is, like I was saying, you have a particular thesis, that you are going out there. So if you're running a high yield bond portfolio, you're going out and you're buying high yield bonds, right? And if you're running a cancer cure, if you're looking for cancer, you're, looking for biotechs or small medical companies that are working in that field, right? So we didn't really utilize a lot of brokers. What we did was we took things from our network of people because we felt that was pretty reasonable. However, I will say that, and I coined the phrase in the office called deck roulette, which was basically, you do get a lot of decks and they come from multiple sources, be them friends or unsolicited calls. And you do have an obligation to everyone to take a look at them, right? Because God forbid something hit your desk, you didn't look at it, and you find out 2 years later it's the next Google.
Yeah, I had a person I interviewed at Family Office Association many years ago. I'm probably not going to mention his name, but I'll give him kudos. On stage, I'm interviewing him. He said, yeah, I don't know if it was the two founders themselves or a representative, but came into his office maybe 99 and presented the opportunity for, you got it, investing in Google. And he said, oh, like, how are you going to upend Yahoo and those guys? I'm not going to do this. And to his credit, he mentioned that he kicked himself on it. And then he did spout out 3 great investments that he made to offset that. But that still bothered him, I guess, as it should to this day.
Yeah. Yeah. And in this day and age, I do think that there's a lot of due diligence that goes into things, and you clearly have to think out of the box, because there's a lot of business plans that over these years that I think that if you took a look at them on their face, you would be like, that's not going to work. I mean, we would always make the joke about Build-A-Bear, right? I mean, everybody, if somebody came in,
young kids, they love it.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody came in and pitched you Build-A-Bear, you kind of like roll your eyes at it, but then you know what? It became a real business, right? And then you got the ancient story from a million years ago, where you could get a bagel and a cup of coffee on the street, and a very good cup of coffee, mind you, on the street corner in New York City for 90 cents a million years ago, and then somebody comes out and says, "Hey, we're going to serve coffee in a nicer place and charge you 4 times as much." So, I mean, who knew that Starbucks was going to work?
And you're going to do it, and you're going to pay for it.
Exactly.
That maybe leads to a question, because my audience knows I love kind of critical meets creative thinking. How do you overcome a little bit of bias that you have from your education to your experience to potentially outcome bias? Part of it may be driven by simply the markets or timing, no offense, maybe not as much to a specific skill set. How do you remain open to thinking out of the box, to being both a critical and a creative thinker? Do you surround yourself with younger and diverse people to think of things differently? Do you bounce ideas off people? What is a little bit of your secret?
That is a great question, because you have to remain childlike, right, in this world, or
yes.
or you will end up, very, very myopic. And I think it's important for people, regardless of age, to keep abreast of things. But you touched upon something very important in terms of why the age bracket of your staff matters, and you definitely need to listen to the younger. You have to listen to everybody. And briefly, somebody once told me a couple of years ago, this guy was 30 and his girlfriend was like 25 at the time, and they were breaking up. And he said to me, "We're breaking up because there's a generation gap." I'm like, "Excuse me? You guys are like 5 years apart." But time moves so quickly, right? And time moves so quickly that, like, in our generation, you can, 20 years goes by, everybody listened to the same music and the same TV shows.
And today, we start to groupthink. Yes.
Yeah. Now, like, there was an entire generation of kids that played Angry Birds day in and day out. There's kids today that don't know what Angry Birds is because they're not playing it anymore. And that is not a 20-year gap. That's like a 4-year gap.
No, they switch Fortnite and then something else will come along.
Exactly. So to your point, I think it is very important. It's very important, and even more so now in the post-COVID world, to definitely have conversations with 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and even you're like, I got a 16-year-old boy. I'm like, what game are you playing? What are you into? What are you doing? Because if anybody was to tell you that some of these YouTubers that are streaming video games are, we would say this to my principal, like, did you know? Because we went and met some Fortnite star, because we were thinking of maybe partnering up and doing something, and all of us were legitimately like just shocked at the number of viewers the kid got, the amount of money the kid was making, and just the whole universe itself was just eye-opening that some of these kids get 100 million plus, unique views a month.
It is pretty crazy. And I bet you the creators of Fortnite, Epic Games, probably 7 or 8 years ago, went to the market looking for investors. And I know they're still a private company. I bet you they had a really, really, really hard time. So you're going to create a game which takes a lot of quote unquote people power and time, and you're going to give it away for free. And you're going to think you're going to make money on quote unquote the young ones, usually younger teenage boys that are playing on something called skins. That's laughable, because in our age bracket, and my God, even probably people in their late 20s, then they don't understand that. No, I'm not saying every company is going to turn into an Epic Games and a Fortnite success. Of course not. But this goes back to what you said earlier, looking at a lot of stuff, thinking outside the box, and not just dismissing something because overly quickly on the surface, it doesn't quite sound like it's going to work. Now, again, in private companies, most are not going to work. I get it. It's a numbers game. So this was really intriguing. Your mindset would be, and again, my experience, but I don't know, been doing this for 20 years. I know a truckload of billionaires and centibillionaires. That is the mindset that they would like someone in your role to think. We could spend a lot of time on that, but why don't we move a little bit? Why don't you give us the short version, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, take us inside a little bit of a company that maybe you guys invested in, a little bit of a case study, and walk us through kind of what that looked like.
Well, the one that jumps out at me in particular, which was, now again, we invested in a number of consumer companies, a couple of tech companies, and a handful of service-based companies and stuff. But one in particular that came across our desk was a multi-location food service business that fell on hard times, and for whatever reason, at the time, we ended up taking it over, and it was a very interesting situation because, and this does happen inside some private equity shops where obviously you will get board seats. And sometimes people will leave the private equity firm in order to become an operator of one of the underlying, portfolio companies. I ended up running this food service company, and we opened up we had to reopen a bunch of locations. We had to start we bought a truck. We got truck routes. We ended up with a staff of 50 something people. I mean, it was really a very interesting, almost 18, 19 months operating that business, which had numerous challenges, partly because of COVID. Eventually we rolled into COVID with the thing. So it didn't really go where it needed to go. But that exhibits sort of the open-minded flexibility that you need when you're working for a family office. If you're working for a large bank or investment bank or company, look, that's a professional life and it's a career and there's a path and a hierarchy and all of that kind of stuff. When you're working in a family office, it becomes over time a very intimate part of your life, and you become close, certainly never a member, but you become close with the family and you learn what makes them tick. And then you're on call quite a bit, and you're happy to be on call because it's part of you've become part of this thing, and it seeps into your own personal DNA is to make things work. So when somebody was just like, hey, what are we going to do with these stores? I basically said my family had a couple of supermarkets back in the day, and they were like, okay, you're doing it.
Welcome to the entrepreneurial world of principals making quick decisions, and
exactly.
You got to be on the fly like that. That happens all the time.
All the time.
We'll switch a little bit to more broader topics in the family office, then come back to investing. Looking back, what would you say were advantages and what you enjoyed in a family office, specifically a single family office, and maybe what was one disadvantage?
I think it's pretty easy for me. I mean, obviously I've, had a long career, but I've basically been in 3 different jobs, right? So I'm loyal by nature. And when I start something, that's basically what I do. I mean, talk about culture gaps too. I mean, you could look at some of these, and there's no disadvantage to it anymore, but we just grew up in a time where people spent years at places. And now, I mean, I'm not saying there's a gig economy, but people tend to move forward. So I think working in a family office environment, given my penchant and inclination towards, loyalty and an ownership structure, even though I certainly didn't own the company, right? But I took an ownership perspective. And, there's always that, if you're walking down the hallway and there's a piece of paper on the floor, there's the person that picks up the piece of paper and there's a person that walks by it, right? And you always want to hire the person that picks it up, because the person that's picking up that piece of paper and putting it in the garbage has an ownership mentality, right? And I think that when you bring that to a family office, the loyalty and all that, I think it's a really good fit. And that's definitely one of the pluses of working in any one of these sort of environments. The disadvantages is depending on the family office, they tend to be somewhat intimate, and you're working within your world, right? So, and you're doing with what you're doing. So, I think, and it's very unique and very specific to just that entity. So your day-to-day over time becomes very, unique to what you're doing, as opposed to, if you're running, the asset-backed desk, or, like I mentioned before, if you're trading high yield, that's a job and a career that exists elsewhere that you can do. It's not as specific.
Were there any resources that, looking back, would have been of value, even if it was expensive, maybe six figures a year, that someone working in a big private equity shop might have had that you didn't have access to?
I would say, I could have used somebody like you, obviously, in your services during my tenure. But I would say, look, yet again, it's part of the world that we live in, right? I think 15 years ago, there's a lot of value to these big places that have resources and stuff like that. But in this day and age, the power that's at all of our fingertips is really just mind blowing, right? In terms of the amount of stuff that you can get done, in terms of due diligence and finding out things. And you could pull a company apart very, very quickly in this day and age. I do think that but in terms of what I think we were missing, we probably could have had, a portfolio accounting services. We kind of did that on our own. So I think if we got bigger, we probably could have brought in a little bit more quote unquote administration services that I think certainly the larger shops have. And then obviously the larger shops have, teams of, analysts, based on their, particular expertise.
I do look and wonder, why most single family offices don't even make it to 15 years. And I did speak about this on other lives and podcasts that I hosted. There often is a disconnect between the generation upcoming, possibly generations upcoming, and both the principal, sure, and that's somewhat of a governance issue, but the family office itself. You mentioned some of the age differences, and that could be an issue. A perspective or perception sometimes becomes reality. I always recommend that the executive in a family office understand the nuances within the family, stays on top of their game, and interacts as much as possible, reasonably possible, with the rising generation. And again, I know this is not part of the job description of being a great CIO. This is the importance of emotional intelligence, of communication, and I think using your noggin, just using your head. It's a little bit of job security. How would you recommend to someone looking to be active in a family office or active in one now to have some level of back and forth with the rising generations?
I preservation of wealth, right, is contingent upon doing exactly what you said. There was the old saying, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, right? It was grandfather made the business, dad grew the business, and then the 3rd generation, literally blew up the business, right? And that was partly because, I could wax philosophical on the Federal Reserve keeping money cheap and all that, but that's another podcast. But typically, it's hard for these generations to keep, and it was always kind of that 3rd generation thing. I do believe that the proliferation of family offices, back how many years ago, there was only really a handful of them for the incredibly ultra net worths, and it tended to be a little bit of a European thing, if memory serves me correctly. the proliferation of family offices that exists today, I believe, is evidence that wealthy people know that they need to properly do estate planning, do proper tax planning, and educate these the younger members. I have one friend of mine, very wealthy. They have annual meetings with all of the different. They do a family offsite, and then the various players, trustees, or whatever, hand out a book to everybody, and everybody knows where they stand. So I think the first things first is communication is key. Everybody needs to know where they stand, because it's surprises that I think end up causing some level of family schisms, right?
Well,
So
that usually is the illusion that communication has taken place at all. You may think it has, but likely in the way that it could, it hasn't. Yeah,
yes,
you bring up some great points.
And that's a macro case on why I think the industry, quote unquote, whether it's an industry or not, but why wealthy families are taking that issue very seriously. In the case of our specific thing, I have a little bit of a professorial bent to the way I describe the world. So there were a couple of younger members of the family that, over the years, I did break out my markers on the whiteboard and did, explain to them, how do the capital markets work? How do the debt markets work? How does it all come together? Where is private equity in the stack of investing? What is the difference between public and private, et cetera, et cetera? And I think
they're not going to learn in school, by the way, for the most
part.
No,
and everybody's still, everybody's learning cosine, tangent, trigonometry, and all that. I mean, everybody should learn how to fill out mortgage paperwork first. It'd probably be. I don't know the last time anybody, figured out a tangent. But
yes, that is true. Yeah, those are very interesting points. The great thing that a single family office could do, if it's done right, is coordination of some of those services that you mentioned under one roof, 24/7, dedicated to that family. Is it easy? No. Is it expensive? Well, that's relative. And even doing some of the things that you noted that some families are doing on an annual meeting, it's all good. And the reality is, even still, after generations, it likely still isn't enough. It needs to be revamped. It needs to be better. And again, having done this for a gazillion years around the world and consulted and created over 20 family offices, the role that is really valuable, which is what you described on the whiteboard, is kind of a chief learning officer role. And the great Matt Wesley, and those active in the community will be familiar with his amazing work, has eloquently, better than I could, wrote about that. And we're going to have Matt on, I hope, sometime this fall. So simply stay tuned. But that opportunity of the glue that holds it together and the rising generation is really kind of everything. Related a little bit to that in governance and decision making. And this was probably more of a principle that made boom, boom decisions like that. But how did you need to engage with outside advisors to the family? Was it through an intermediary? Was it through the principal? Was it strictly just you and the principal, and he did what he wanted to do behind the scenes?
It was more the latter. We would get it, every once in a while they would reach out to us for certain things, but we didn't really cross those lines. And I would venture to say that inside most family offices, there's, and specifically the larger ones, right? The trust and estates area is doing what they do, and tax is doing what they do, and the real estate, management, which is big. We didn't get engaged in that, but it's a lot. I have a friend of mine who manages a large estate for a very wealthy guy, and I'm shocked at how busy he is and how much it is for him to coordinate all of that amongst these different properties and all that kind of stuff. So that was not our, we were in our silo, but I do know that a lot of that stuff went on.
Did the principal have a board or committee that helped to make decisions, majority, consensus, whatever, on investing, or really it was his call?
No, that was us. That was us. We were small, so we would all sit around and kick it around, and everybody would give their 2 cents on whether we thought that this was something to engage in. And again, keeping this a little bit on the agnostic side for some of your listeners, every family office is different, right? And every family office has its own mandate. And and depending on the size, because there's some that are, very big and global for that matter,
Sure.
and they require a lot more formal structure, than obviously what we were doing. And then everybody is really functioning at that particular level in those larger shops.
Just a personal question, because I like to know how people, again, I'm kind of big on critical thinking and the process for making a decision. How did you generally source information broadly on the markets? Was there a favorite economist you followed? You like the Wall Street Journal? You like Bloomberg? What did you watch? Who did you read? What did you listen to?
Well, as we spoke about prior to this, I believe that one of the major roles for all of us in financial services these days, especially on the buy side, is reading is now part of your job, right? And you have to read, and there's no central location where you're going to be getting something. And not to quote a famous movie, but you got to do your own homework, right? And you have to go in and drill stuff in. So I would, I would look at a lot of industry stuff, right? And there's a lot of newsletters out there. So if you take beauty, for instance, right? There's just a lot of resources yet again at the tip of your fingertips to look for beauty or any other industry. But I will say that one of an interesting cheat sheet, for lack of a better term, is going and looking up conferences in the specific industry that you're looking to maybe have an investment in, and looking at what is the keynote speaking about, and what are the topic, what are the offsite, what are the off location, roundtable discussions, what are they talking about, right? Because that's where you can really get into the issues that are like really nuanced to a particular business. So if you go to an investment company and, like if you go to a 1940 like mutual fund conference down in DC, right? What are they going to be talking about? Well, they're going to be talking about all these 40 Act things. They're going to be talking about different rules and regs that the SEC may be coming out, or distribution and all that kind of stuff. But if you go to a conference sheet, like I mentioned on beauty, you may talk about, shipping, like how's everything, like where are people manufacturing stuff, how to get core, are there any issues in sort of supplying some core ingredients for some of these things? What's the distribution channel look like? What's shelf space cost? You can really get a lot of nuances from looking at conference schedules.
Excellent. And I think I know the answer to your question. It wasn't quite what the investment office for the family did, but I will ask, was there some creating bank accounts, opening up treasury accounts, dabbling in public companies a little bit? Was there any investment creep relative to what the core focus was, that you needed to stay diverse in your activities and skill set?
No, look, we're all human beings. So I think over time, everybody has different discussions, about trying to do different things, but we pretty much stuck to our mandate. When you're dealing with ultra high net worth individuals or families, you really don't know the full story, and you shouldn't, right? Because unless that's what your chair is, and you don't know the full story. And an analogy of this would be, so if you're running a small mid-cap fund, right? Are you asking your clients what their large cap exposure is or their global? No, you're hired to manage their small mid-cap allocation, right? And I think that if you start breaking outside of your particular bailiwick, you sort of get out of your focus. So we were pretty much charged with what we were charged with, and that's what we ran with.
And I'm just thinking about the advantages of being a direct investor and disadvantages. There's obviously some of both. It is more complicated. You definitely have more control. You have some level of control depending on your investment of when it's going to exit. So a little bit more of a tax picture. You have more of a say in the matter. So you may provide value that's also intrinsic. But I would think another advantage is potentially the rising generation kind of gets to see how businesses work. They get a little bit like, hey, like we're invested in these 7 companies. We're looking at this company. Here's how to understand cap tables and a little bit of the direction and thesis of the company, and here's what we're doing, and here's where I think we could provide value. And the most important thing is the leader of the company and the people they hire and the importance of people. Like, there's so many lessons in business and life that could come to the family maintaining an entrepreneurial mindset and a business mindset. And I go back to the chief learning officer. I go back to the importance and value of being a direct investor in private companies. So maybe I'm being a little bit repetitive, but I see that as being so valuable, even when the rising generation may not have that much of an interest in making a career or being an expert in finance. I think they benefit from knowing a little bit of how the sausage is made.
100%. And there's no question that, I mean, I'm an entrepreneur by sort of inclination, and dealing with people that are doing these things de novo and making something from nothing. And I tell my kids all the time, when like that is, if nothing existed and then 2 years later something is there and then you helped that and you built that, there's no greater feeling than that.
I agree. That is a very valuable thought.
And again, for collectively wealthy families, it's you want to make sure, and it goes back to sort of that shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves thing, is the reason why historically that third generation, didn't really, dad could have had like an auto bodies, parts business, or, something that was really granular, in industrial or whatever. And then the third generation all goes to college or whatever, and everybody wants them to be whatever. You can't lose that nuance that you pick up when you actually watch a business grow and you see and then you bring value to other CEOs, because everybody's going to trip over the same, thing that's in the road. So now you could sit there and say, hey, we've been doing this for, don't hire an influencer. When you look at some companies, like that was one thing, everybody wants to hire an influencer. And we, our thing was, don't hire an influencer. They want a lot of money. They want a big, specifically celebrity influencers. They want a lot of money. And how would you learn that? By seeing it happen before, right? So the more you do, the more you can help out some of these guys. So both the younger members of the family can learn, as well can some of these CEOs, because a lot of these startups now and these Series A's are being done by late 20, 30, and 40-year-olds for sure.
And in terms of like understanding how the principal felt about you and your performance. Now, again, I'm really big on there needs to be more quantifiable measures, metrics, and statistics, which I've spoken about in a family office to better gauge and benchmark and really do best practices. But of course, you can never get around the fact of the word family and individual feelings and communication, more qualitative. How did that play out with you and the principal, whether it was probably not week by week, but month, quarterly, and yearly, in terms of how they felt about your performance and feedback that you got?
Well, again, I agree with you that I think collectively everybody would like to know where they stand, right? And I think that specifically in a post-COVID America where people aren't going into the office, I think that's a big question out there for people. In our particular case, we were very, very tight knit. So you definitely knew where you were. You knew that you were adding value, and if you weren't, he would tell you.
Well, that's good.
We would get the perennial, what are you working on? What are you working on? Right. And, because there's times where you're sourcing deals that maybe nothing new is coming through, or you're just sourcing stuff. There's really no call to action because, the decks on the desk aren't really, bringing anything to the table at that particular moment. And there was some level of, what do we got? What do we got? So,
yeah. Well, that's good. Again, the family doesn't necessarily, unlike, say, a private equity fund, have to deploy. They could have cash on the sidelines, and sometimes that is the best move. But that also creates a little bit of angst. You are more of a direct investing office specifically, and what happens if week to week, month to month goes by, and there's not money being allocated. And again, that's a little bit of, it sounds good in theory. We only invest in great deals. We're strictly quantitative, but the reality is the reality. They are looking at, well, I'm paying this person a pretty lot of money and we're not. Now, I'm going to argue, yeah, you're paying them a lot of money to sometimes get you not into deals and get you out of shit that you're better off not being in. But sometimes, again, human emotions, they don't quite get that at the moment. Sometimes the best deals you make, Chris, confirm, are actually the deals that you don't make.
100%. 100%. And you can't force it, right? There's, and there was a lot of stuff. And I think we all, well, I mean, we were all, for instance, we were all blown up during COVID. Everybody was shopping a lot of different stuff around, for groups like ours to get involved in. And with hindsight, it was great that we took a pass on things because it turned out to be all very transient or didn't work at all.
And yeah, I just got an email from from one of the viewers, I guess, in the live. And thank you. I don't get many compliments, so I am going to throw this one out. Angelo, at least today you're asking really good questions. Well, thank you, by the way. And I'd like to hope after decades in this industry and building up, I hope, a good brand and reputation and immersing myself. And this is not a part-time job. This is literally 24/7 my life that, if nothing else, at least hope that I could ask good questions. What was it, President Lincoln that said, what, you want to chop down the tree, spend 59 minutes sharpening the axe and then 1 minute chopping it down, literally. So asking questions is very, very important. Back a little bit to perspective of how the principal felt, and I know what the audience would love to hear. Angelo, comp. How did it work? Was it a base salary? Was it a bonus? Did they get carried? Did they get a piece of the action? Did they get bonused up to co-invest in deals and they had a stake in the matter? One family office, one, that saying, unfortunately, is kind of true. And again, I want you to keep some things discreet and private. You don't have to open up everything. And I'm doing the best I could to respect the privacy of the family as well. And that they gave you an opportunity and they did a tremendous job. And I'm sure you're very grateful for the opportunity that you had with them.
100%.
But if you could share a little bit of insight in terms of, and maybe lessons learned about negotiating and compensation moving forward for an executive.
So yet again, from a general perspective, I think a lot of that conversation depends on the particular size and role that you're coming in at. I think that there's some very large family offices out there that when they're hiring either a CFO or a tax or an analyst or any of those kind of positions, they tend to be out there pretty, competitive with the bigger, more public private equity shops and stuff like that, because they're sharing those levels of talent. So I think those compensation schemes tend to match what you would see in quote unquote industry. To go to our personal situation, we were, more than well compensated. And we were able to participate in the deals on a personal front if we wanted to.
Nice.
And if we, and if we had a home run, then, we all knew we had a home run, so everybody was treated pretty fairly.
What was your process or the family office's process? Is okay, we made 7 investments this year, 4 investments last year. We're not looking to exit unless it's a tremendous opportunity that quickly after a year or two. Therefore, you're now not just investing and looking to source deals and invest, you also have to service. Now, especially if it was a majority interest, then your hands are really full. But even a minority interest, how did you keep in the loop with the C-level executives and the entrepreneurs of the companies you invested in? How did you help to provide guidance? And there's only so many hours in the day to go around.
Well, that's a great question because we've spent the lion's share of this thing talking about sort of the investing piece, but then you do end up with an existing portfolio, and over the years you end up with quite a few, and there's definitely a big part of the job is maintaining those relationships and doing those follow-up calls, because these companies, they're growing. They're growing and they're going to have growing pains and they're going to have issues. And the last thing that you ever want, specifically from an allocator of capital, of somebody else's money is you don't want any surprises. You never want to walk into the room and tell somebody, I didn't know, right? You do not want to sit there and have to look somebody in the eye and have them say to you, did you know this was happening here? And you say you didn't know. So it's in your own personal best interest as well as the collective's best interest to maintain the relationships with the founders and the investment, in the partners in any of the companies that you invested in. We at times would request observer seats on the board. We took observer seats because we didn't want to put anybody into the direct chain of being actually on the board. And I think any deep pocket individual probably would refrain from that level of exposure as well. So I think being on the board, in either at an observer level, it gives you some of the inner workings on what everybody is looking on. But the onus is on you to pick up the phone and hear what they're telling you and get the updates and stay abreast of things and keep very diligence and copious notes on whatever it is that you learn, so that when you're asked the question, how is XYZ doing? Have you spoken to them? Again, you don't want to be in a position where you're telling somebody who's put their money on the line on your recommendation that you don't know.
And in terms of building out a team, you have the principal, you have yourself, and I know it was more of a direct investing, non-correlated investments at that family office only. I get it. So it's a bit more narrow, but you must have had a in-source or selectively outsource analysts and others that put you in the role, but your entrepreneurial background with your past endeavors could have helped hiring, firing, making the right decisions, and getting the best out of the talent.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was pretty much our role. We didn't use anybody, externally for any of that.
And did the staff grow to be 4, 5, 6 people? Did it stay lean?
We had a staff. We started off, there was 4 of us. Then we got to about 7 of us. And then with COVID, we went back down to 4 of us.
And was your role being somewhat the right-hand person of the principal, the CIO, quasi the COO? Were you involved in performance or getting the best out of and making sometimes tough decisions with employees?
Of the underlying companies or our own office?
No, like the family office.
No, the family, we were pretty tight knit, so there wasn't really a lot of that going on. In terms of the food company thing that I, ended up operating on a relatively, very, very active role, that definitely came into some good old fashioned, because it was that kind of a business. There was a lot of turnover and stuff like that in that kind of a company. Going back to sort of the analyst question, it is interesting too, because something we didn't touch upon is when you're investing in these companies and then you're on the cap table, you could look at the other investors and then you develop relationships with some of the other investors as well.
Very good point. Yes.
And then you get into comparing notes, right? And then you can get some good insight as well. And they become another source. And then if you're invested in 20 companies and the cap table on each of them, let's say, has upwards of whatever. I mean, there's a lot of relationships there that are in very similar situations as you. And that opens up, like going back to the original question, but how do you source deals? I mean, that opens up a whole lot of deal sourcing as well.
I mean, I always talk about the 3 most important aspects of a single family office, and just to make it a little catchy and quick, people, number 1, and then you could argue the order of 2 or 3, but it's almost always consistently technology and systems. I'm going to talk now, COVID hits, and we're coming towards the end, by the way, but COVID hits, and it changes the dynamic of going to the office. That puts extra importance on systems, processes, communication, and I could argue technology, although in what you did is more direct investing, it's not quite as important. But what was the impact of COVID? Less so from investing, more so on operations in the family office. And did it ever quite bounce back to the camaraderie, the people getting together every day that was pre-COVID?
I would, to that question, I would say no. and I think a lot of us, and not specific to this office, but I think all of us kind of miss that sort of routine that we were all part of pre-COVID, and COVID really was, just an unbelievable. I mean, I don't even know how well it's all going to age for all of us, but COVID was a tough period of time. I mean, for especially for an older guy, he liked coming in the office. He liked hanging out with us. He liked having these conversations, and Zoom just wasn't doing it, and
For sure.
and we all know that you can have 2 or 3 Zooms, sitting from wherever you're sitting. But once that call is over, you're in your living room. It's not like you're going to go out and have a post coffee, meeting. You're going to have a post meeting coffee or catch up or whatever, and then you're getting back on the phone. So I think you're 100% right. The post COVID world kind of definitely was different. And then it was also different because for us, I mean, for me, I like going to the office. It was always, a break for me. But none of the younger guys wanted, everybody's like, I'm not coming in. I'm working, everyone's WFH, as the younger kids were calling it, work from home. You get the morning text, WFH, and you're like, all right, so it's just the 2 of us today.
And during the core part of COVID, that first year to even year and a half, did you still invest in private companies and invest in some without ever physically meeting the entrepreneurs?
I'd have to put my thinking cap on. I think we did allocate some capital because because we had some consumer companies that obviously, look, if the government's giving out free money and telling you to sit on your couch, everybody was clicking away, like you couldn't believe. So there was a number of our portfolio companies and subsequent opportunities. COVID was very good to them, right? Alcohol delivery businesses.
Yeah, it did great.
Yeah, marijuana delivery businesses.
That too.
Cozy clothing, right? Anything like that. So I think there was a number of different things that did quite well during COVID, and some things that didn't.
Yes, of course. And do you consider yourself, from a direct investing perspective, and I did emphasize direct investing perspective because I think it gets a little trickier, a contrarian investor?
No. I think that if you're involved in the particular investment class that we were involved in, you're inherently bullish, right? You're looking for companies that you think are going to grow. So I don't believe that now you could be looking for things that are, contrarian could get down to the sector. You may sit there and say, hey, look, I think all this Green New Deal stuff's nonsense. I'm going to go buy coal, right? You could be taking opposite sides of sort of sector bets, if you want to classify that as contrarian. But in my sense, you're inherently bullish, right? Contrarian to me is, do you think that the markets themselves, meaning the public markets, may be over their skis a little bit, and then there's tools for you to either short all of that and take advantage of that. But I believe in our side that we were, with the bets that we made, we were full in chips.
Well, we're heading, to the home stretch. We'll wrap up in probably 2 or 3 minutes. I, did want to note, I'm so glad that the principal and the family gave you, obviously a talented individual, the opportunity when you were both raw, both the principal and you, relative to the concept of even a family office. Should have reached out to Angelo. That could have been of help, but we didn't know each other back then.
No, and now we do.
But for sure. But this, and you hinted at it and said it earlier, and I know I'm going to sound like a mouthpiece to billionaires and the super rich, but I just see all the challenges now we're going through in the country and all this nonsense. Of course, there are bad rich people, just like there are bad, quote unquote, poor people in middle class. The vast majority of people, even as an inheritor, which they didn't ask for, they're put into that situation, which has its own stresses, different than maybe Maslow's hierarchy of food, shelter, water, etc., but not without. I mean, trust me, I've been doing this a long, long time. The vast majority are incredible entrepreneurs. They're excellent people in their community and society. They practically all give back in charitable and philanthropic initiatives. And at the heart, they're really good people. It's sad to some degree to see after generations that it does get challenging, and we hinted at some of the reasons why. Go on my family office TV on YouTube and listen to my near hour and 40 minutes with the one and only Jay Hughes, and we get really deep into family governance dynamics because that's him. He's the king of family offices from that perspective, and it's an honor to have interviewed him and have known him for many years, and just so much that I learned from other amazing people in the community, including you, Chris. But, kudos to the family and all that they've done from a societal perspective. And we're all imperfect. We all make mistakes probably every day, but that doesn't stop us from being supportive of each other within a community and giving back. And again, and I know I'm almost sounding a little sentimental, but I've been in this community for so long. I've met so many incredible people that I've learned from, and I wish I could have learned more. And I could have been a little bit more humble and open-minded and things that could have been to my benefit. But even in my old age, I'm still learning. I hope you all know I love this community. It's really all that I do and all that I love. And I still have a lot to learn. And hopefully I've learned a thing or two over my decades and my experiences. But, have an opportunity to reach out. You all know how to reach me. And engage in some of the things I'm doing that really no one else is doing from an educational perspective, mainly with my family office masterclass and my SFO dream team. And it's lightly described at angelorobles.com, but have an opportunity to reach out and learn more. I think I'm changing everything in the community, but more to come. And I'm going to be around for a long, long time. I want to keep on doing this well into my 60s, 70s, and perhaps older. I want to be like Jay Hughes, who's 81 and just loves what he does. If I can only be so fortunate to live that long and have even some of his wisdom, that will be awesome. But Chris, family offices do adapt and change. There's often changes within the family and other dynamics for the reasons that we noted. You're an incredibly talented individual working in the family office community. What are you looking for moving forward?
Well, I just want to say to you that was a really nice thing that you said, and it's true. The families that I came across, not including my own, that I worked with, but others, the genuine generosity, and it's so frustrating in sort of this quasi class warfare that people try to engage in, and with this blanket pictures on the rich. The vast majority are wonderful people, and they're not the way they're portrayed on TV or in all their kind of.
They're not Mr. Burns on The Simpsons.
No,
it's pretty rare.
They will give you they will help. They will do what they can. They're very generous. They're philanthropic, and the interesting thing about philanthropy is that it's a very uniquely American, activity, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And if there's a cat in a tree, all of a sudden there's like 800 grand in like a, GoFundMe page. That is an unbelievably uniquely American thing. And these wealthy families, they take care of so many people, and the way they treat everybody in their universe is unbelievable. So I think that that's a good takeaway for me. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of a curveball with this particular situation, and the family, and it has wound down for some, proprietary reasons. So right now I'm currently, looking for a similar role, within an existing family office or a de novo family office, that I played, for the last 8 years. I think I'm very good at it. I think I add value, and I'm looking forward to, maybe helping somebody else out with that.
Sure. And of course, if you're a principal or someone from that perspective, or one of the recruiters that I know or others, feel free to always reach out to me, and I'm happy to make an intro. But those that would like to maybe reach out to you a little bit more directly, Chris, whether it's via LinkedIn, social media, email, how can they learn more about you and reach out?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, Chris Anci, ANCI, and then my email is canci, CANCI, at mtkadvisors.com.
Excellent. You were very gracious with your time. I told you 45 minutes to an hour, and we're probably pretty close to an hour and a half. And for me, that's short. So thank you. It's been great to have you on. I hope the audience enjoyed it. They know how to reach you. They certainly know, after what feels like so many of these on my end, how to reach out to me. So I hope you all enjoyed it. Again, next week I'm speaking at multiple conferences and traveling, but I might do one live from the road. So we shall see how that will play out. I am incredibly busy. It's been a great time, but you all know how to reach me, and kind of everything is under the hub for me of angelorobles.com, which I might add is still a work in progress on both some pictures and some nuances. So we're working on it. Just my web team had a great time in August where they had more vacation time for sure than I did, as I was grinding 7 days a week, writing and shooting videos. But those are things that I do love to do. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Chris, for being a great guest. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Nice chatting. Bye.